Every autumn in New England, the trees turn yellow, orange, purple, and red. The landscapes seem magical. At no other time is there such a splendid display of color. But it lasts only briefly. The colors soon fade, the leaves drop, and the trees become bare. The forest floors are covered with dead and decaying foliage. These are temperate deciduous forests. Deciduous forests are forests that each year shed their leaves. This distinguishes them from other kinds of forests, like taigas, where evergreens and conifers keep most of their foliage all year round. Temperate deciduous forests are also different from tropical deciduous forests that exist close to the equator in Central and South America. Their trees lose their leaves in the dry season to conserve water. But they don't have the colorful changes that distinguish the trees in the temperate zones farther away from the equator.
Temperate deciduous forests are a type of biome. A biome is an area that has a distinct climate and certain kinds of living things, the most obvious of which are plants. Temperate deciduous forests have 4 distinct seasons, and they experience precipitation all year round. Their relatively wet climate distinguishes them from the drier climate of grasslands, another biome where trees have difficulty growing. There are different types of temperate deciduous forests that are classified according to their dominant species of trees. In New England, sugar maples, beech, and yellow birch are the most common trees. As you go south, oaks become more common. In the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, oaks and hickories are the dominant forest vegetation.
The plants and animals of temperate deciduous forests have adapted to seasonal changes. When spring approaches, ice that covers streams and ponds starts to melt. As the weather continues to get warmer, there are signs of new life. Different kinds of wildflowers appear, seemingly overnight. Some have formed their leaves and flowers underground. When they pop through the surface, they unfurl themselves within a few short days. Because the trees overhead have not yet fully formed their leaves, more sunlight is able to reach the forest floor. Many low-growing wildflowers, called spring ephemerals, take advantage of this sunlight. In a few weeks, the broad leaves of the trees will create an umbrella-like canopy that will shade the floor. After blooming, these wildflowers will drop their petals. They will wither away. But their roots and bulbs will remain alive underground, ready to grow again next year.
In early spring, many trees also blossom with colorful flowers. Small leaves pop out of their buds. There is a feathery quality to the foliage. The forest is turning green, but it is still full of light. Birds that were absent during the cold winter, like this rose-breasted grosbeak, reappear. Many of the springtime birds spend the cold winter months in Central and South America. In the spring, birds like this wood thrush build nests and have their young. Spring is a time of new life for many kinds of animals. The weather is warmer, and it is easier for young animals like these raccoons to survive. This opossum clings to a branch as her children cling to her.
As spring progresses, the leaves of the trees reach their full size. The tops of the tallest trees form the canopy or roof of the forest, shading the layers below. Much closer to the forest floor, woody shrubs such as hobblebush have adapted to shady conditions. Ferns, too, do well in the shade. They have broad leaves that are good at gathering whatever light reaches them.
As summer ends and fall begins, the days get shorter and the weather colder. The colder weather makes it harder for deciduous trees to maintain their broad leaves. The leaves change color as plants stop producing chlorophyll, a pigment that gives leaves their green color. As chlorophyll fades, other pigments become more prominent, and the leaves turn yellow, orange, and red.
The bright autumn foliage lasts only a few weeks. As winter approaches, the forest trees drop their leaves. Many factors are involved in trees losing their leaves. The shortening number of daylight hours is one. The colder weather is another. By late fall, almost all the leaves have fallen, and the trees are bare. By some estimates, a single acre of forest floor is blanketed with over 10 million leaves. Many leaves also sink to the bottoms of the forest's lakes, ponds, and streams. During the fall, many kinds of wildlife prepare for the coming winter. Squirrels gather and store nuts. Many kinds of birds fly south for the winter. The sounds of snow geese fill the forests of New England as they fly overhead on their annual migrations south from Canada.
The colors of the more northern forests change once again with the first snows. Landscapes that were brown and gray become white. The surfaces of lakes and streams may freeze. The blanket of leaves that covers the forest floor may itself be covered by a blanket of snow. The snow muffles sound. The forests, fields, and farms are quiet. Snowshoeing through the woods, the only sounds you may hear are your own steps. It is well worth the effort to appreciate the special beauty of the forest at this time of year. All is not still or lifeless. You can see birds like this tufted titmouse that remain all year round. It fluffs up its feathers to stay warm. Deer forage for food in the snow. Many animals, such as the skunk, become less active in winter. Many trees have already formed tiny new leaves that they keep tightly wrapped during the winter. When spring comes, the cycle will begin once more as these tiny leaves unfurl in the longer, warmer days.
Throughout the seasons, the animal and plant life of deciduous forests form complex relationships as they depend on each other for survival. This interdependence is most evident in the flow of energy in the forest. All energy comes ultimately from one source, the sun. The plants of the forest use the energy of sunlight, water, nutrients in the soil, and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to manufacture their own food and store it in their leaves, stems, and roots. This process is called photosynthesis. Sunlight and photosynthesis make possible the explosion of leaves and flowers every spring.
Animals depend on the energy stored by plants for their own survival. Many eat plants. Some insects, like this caterpillar, are leaf eaters. Others feed on the nectar and pollen of flowers. Many birds, like this white-throated sparrow, eat seeds. Other birds eat plant eaters. This woodpecker, for example, uses its sharp beak to get at ants, grubs, and other insects. Animals that eat plants or other animals may themselves become prey to a variety of predators. This fox is eating a mouse. Another mouse has become a meal for a corn snake. Some animals have evolved features like camouflage that help them hide from predators. This gray tree frog has colors that make it difficult to distinguish it from the trunk of a tree.
Death and decay are also part of the flow of energy. All living things in a forest eventually die. Dead trees and branches lie across the forest floor. When they die, the nutrients they contain are consumed by other kinds of life, decomposers. Decomposers are living things that feed on dead plant and animal matter and break it down into small parts. Fungi are important decomposers in the forest. They often cover the trunks and branches of dead trees. Worms and bacteria play important roles as decomposers of leaves. They break apart dead leaves and turn them into soil. Decaying leaves are an important source of nutrients. Most leaves decompose in less than a year. Under the visible layer of leaves on the forest floor is a thick layer of humus, made of decomposed leaves and other plant and animal matter. The soil never permanently freezes as it does in the tundra in Arctic climates. This means that the roots of trees can grow deep into the soil, where they absorb the nutrients it contains.
The animals that live in streams and ponds ultimately depend on the leaves of the forest. Almost all the nutrient energy in a stream or pond comes from leaves and other dead plant matter that fall into the water. Many insects eat this dead and decaying plant matter, and these insects themselves become the food for animals like this trout. Temperate deciduous forests don't have the same diversity of life found in tropical rainforests. There are fewer species of plants and animals. Nonetheless, the animal and plant life is impressive. If you're lucky, you might glimpse a moose and her calf, or different kinds of salamanders and other amphibians, or a red-tailed hawk and its chicks. Here it is easy to observe the continuous flow of energy and the universal cycle of birth, growth, death, and decay. Here, too, we can observe how all the different kinds of life are interconnected, and how each has an impact on the forest ecosystem. One species has had a particularly strong impact. That species is our own human species.
People walking the trails and footpaths of the woods of New England frequently encounter stone walls crisscrossing the forest floor. These walls are evidence of a human presence in the past. They provide hints that the forested landscapes we see today look very different from what these same areas looked like even 100 years ago. But these walls are indications of only very recent changes. More dramatic changes took place in the more distant past. 20,000 years ago, the landscape looked more like this Alaskan glacier. It was covered by ice, the last of a series of sheets of ice that ebbed and flowed over much of North America. When the last sheet of ice retreated, the climate remained colder than it is now. Most of the northern United States was covered by tundra. Eventually, a warming of the climate made it possible for trees and forests to take over. The first forests contained spruce and fir, but as the climate continued to warm, these were replaced by deciduous forests.
When the first European settlers arrived, about 2/3 of the North American continent was covered by forest, including most of the eastern part of what is now the United States. These settlers began to cut the forests to build their homes, provide firewood, and clear the land for farming. The pattern and the rate at which the forests were cut varied from place to place. In New England, the rate of clearing accelerated rapidly in the early 1800s when sheep were imported from Portugal to provide wool for textile mills. A growing demand for wool led to a dramatic increase in the number of sheep. By 1840, there were 2 million in Vermont and New Hampshire alone. To support these sheep, most of the landscape was cleared of forest to provide places for grazing. With the loss of forest, wood became scarce, and farmers used stones for walls to keep the sheep within their pastures. These are the stone walls you still see today when you walk through many woods in New England. Marking the boundaries of long-abandoned farms, they indicate that raising sheep didn't prosper for long. The soil was too thin for sheep farming and most other kinds of agriculture. Thousands of farmers gave up, and many headed west to the Great Plains, where the soil was richer and better suited for agriculture.
Today, forests have grown back on most of the land that was cleared in New England. When open land returns to forest, it goes through a series of stages called succession, in which different groups of plants dominate at different times. Among the first plants to appear when farmland is abandoned are shrubs like meadowsweet. These are fast-growing plants that like a lot of sunlight. After a while, small trees such as pin cherry, birch, aspen, and white pine begin to grow. These trees provide shade for other kinds of trees like oak and maple. Eventually, these other trees take over. Most of the forests we now see are in the late stages of succession, but these second-growth forests are different from the primary growth forests that covered the landscape before the European settlers arrived. Back then, trees had hundreds of years to mature. Many reached heights of well over 100 feet.
The trees of North America have undergone other changes. Once elms were common in the forests of New England, and these stately trees graced the streets of its towns and villages. But in the early 1900s, a deadly fungus from Europe started to kill elm trees throughout the United States and Canada. The disease became known as Dutch elm disease. Even the United States Capitol was affected. Workmen cut down dead elms believed to have been planted by George Washington. Chestnuts met a similar fate. These magnificent trees once were among the most common trees east of the Mississippi. But in 1904, ships accidentally imported a deadly fungus on their cargo of logs from China. By 1950, almost every chestnut tree in the United States and Canada had been killed. As elms and chestnuts were decimated by diseases, other trees such as oaks and maples took over, changing the makeup of North American forests.
Today, other threats to deciduous forests exist. Air pollution is one threat. Many scientists feel that pollution from cars, factories, and power plants may be weakening some trees, making them more susceptible to disease. Most scientists fear that carbon dioxide, released into the atmosphere when fossil fuels are burned, is causing the Earth's temperature to slowly rise, a phenomenon known as global warming. Some predict that the Earth's average temperature will rise 4 degrees Fahrenheit by the year 2050. If this is true, global warming could have a dramatic effect on deciduous forests. Some species of trees could not survive in warmer climates.
The growing human population poses other threats to forests. Recently, Large areas of deciduous forests have once again been cleared to make way for homes, shopping centers, and industry. Forests are also being logged because of an increased demand for timber, particularly maple and oak. In the past, such a demand for timber usually meant that all the trees in a section of forest would be cut, a method of lumbering called clear cutting. But some states are now encouraging logging methods that keep the forests healthy. New York State, for example, has been promoting a practice called sustainable forestry. Rather than cutting down all the trees, loggers harvest only a few, leaving a healthy balance of young and mature trees untouched. While protecting the forests, sustainable forestry provides jobs for loggers and much-needed timber. It also provides income to farmers and other landowners who might otherwise be tempted to sell their forests.
Today, more and more people appreciate the beauty and importance of deciduous forests. Forests are valuable for outdoor recreation. There is growing public support to protect them for hikers and campers. Conservation organizations are buying large tracts of forest to prevent them from being cut down. There are now laws that help limit air and water pollution. And there is growing appreciation for the importance of protecting the diversity of plant and wildlife that live in these forests.
What will the deciduous forests be like in the future? It is hard to predict, but one thing we do know is that change is part of this future. Some changes occur yearly. No other kind of forest varies so much from season to season. We see these changes in shifting colors as the forests turn from green to the bright colors of autumn. We see changes when the leaves fall, leaving branches bare. In places where it snows, we see other changes as the forest landscape turns white. We see changes in the lacy foliage of early spring and the colorful flowers of spring ephemerals.
Other changes in these forests have taken place over thousands of years as sheets of ice retreated and forests have grown where once there was tundra. More recently, humans have been the most important agents of change. They have drastically reshaped the landscape, first by cutting down huge areas of forest, and then by abandoning open land, letting it revert to forest once again.
The fate of the forests and how they will change in the next decades and centuries depends largely on us. Only we can protect them. Only we can reduce the pollution that harms them. What we do now determines what these forests will look like for generations to come.